Hey, this is National Master Jesse Cohen with another video for you. This is an extremely instructional position that comes to us from Jeremy Silman's 4th edition of How to Reassess Your Chess. Today we're going to be discussing one of the biggest hurdles that chess players, as they are trying to reach advanced levels, struggle with, and that is balancing material, the fancy word for how much army you have, compared to other imbalances. A lot of players struggle when it comes to sacrificing even small amounts of material, 1 or 2 pawns, or in exchange, in order to get other forms of compensation. When it comes to sacrifices that are for tactics, players have no issues. They'll sacrifice a queen if it means being able to make a checkmate. However, sacrificing small amounts of material when you don't have a clear, concrete win is one of the hardest things for chess players to do. But one of the key takeaways I want everyone to focus on today is that a player must be able to read a chess position and figure out what the goals are for both sides, and then find chess moves that conform to those goals. And if that means giving away material, you have to be willing to do it. So with that being said, let's start this game immediately. So this game comes to us from the American Open, 1998. Walter Brown is playing the white pieces, legendary grandmaster for the US, and Jeremy Silman, author, is playing the black pieces. Let's get into this. D4, D5, Queen's Gambit, declined, develop, 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 accept the gambit. And here's our first moment where white could choose to do material versus other imbalances. They could choose to play the move pawn to e4 right away, taking a giant space advantage in the center, but allowing black to maintain the pawn with b5. And this is something Walter could have done, and something that many top-level grandmasters have and continue to do. However, Walter was more interested in preserving the pawn. Pawn to a4 was played by Walter. Bishop f5. A little note about this move. In most queen-pawn openings, this bishop, the queenside bishop for black, does not get outside the pawn chain, oftentimes due to queen b3 ideas. For example, if we just go back here for a second, and black plays the move bishop f5 right now, which is basically a mistake, white trades and plays queen to b3. And I'm not going to go into all the variations, but black has a really tough time guarding b7 without incurring either positional and or tactical consequences. One of my favorite variations that everyone should take a moment to consider is b6 e4. A very, very tactical position where white basically comes on top, and it's really not even that complicated once you know it. But anyway, back to the game. Bishop f5 is possible in this position because just for the moment, the c4 pawn does prevent queen to b3. The game continues e3, e6, bishop takes, develop, king safety, queen e2. Another important small moment, but remember that Jeremy Silman is always advocating for us to create and build our imbalances. Remembering an imbalance is just a fancy word for the differences between both positions. In this position, a key difference is that white has a superior space advantage, territory advantage, based on the most advanced center, d-pawn. Queen e2 has a simple idea. Play pawn to e4, increasing that space advantage and fixing the trapped-in bishop on c1. Bishop g6 played by Jeremy, simply daring white to play e4 immediately so that we can do a destroy the defender tactic with bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and taking on e4. Instead, the game continues knight to e5, knight d7, rook d1. And I believe at the time that Walter played this somewhat natural move in this opening, it was a novelty. And I'm going to just take a moment to talk about high-level chess for just a moment. At the highest levels, and even, I'm not even talking about 2,700 plus land. I'm talking about 2,500 plus land. Because even though they don't get talked about nearly as much, these are the 99.99 percentile players. These are people that have dedicated their existence to chess. They really have. And at this level, they have a ton of memorized openings. Usually, all the main lines are memorized, and basically most all, if not all, of the sidelines are memorized. So in order to gain an edge or surprise your opponent at these levels, you typically need to come up with a novelty, but not too early. If you come up with a novelty within the first 5 to 10 moves, most masters have seen it. So what you usually see is novelties that occur usually between moves 10 to 15 or 15 to 20. More often 10 to 15, something that takes you down a familiar path and then changes it at a far enough point that your opponent probably doesn't have preparation for it. At this moment, Jeremy Silman has an ability to create an imbalance and decides to go for it. Knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, knight to d7. Now I'll just warn you right away, yes, typically I don't recommend walking into pins. Jeremy had to evaluate if white could exploit this. Please note if there's anything like queen to d2 trying to pile up, we just take on e5 because the queen is guarded enough, so that's not really a thing. And so, yeah, f4. So what has just happened here? Jeremy Silman said, okay, I'm going to damage your pawn structure by giving you stacked pawns in exchange for you getting a temporary, control of this open file and a longer 5-on-4 pawn majority on the king side and a increased territory space advantage on the king side. Remember, the true purpose of the opening is to create good things that your opponent does not share. And the true purpose of the middle game is for you to build on those advantages, build on those differences to the point where you either can convert it straight into a win or convert it into something more permanent, such as material. Your attack builds up so much that you end up having a tactic or some sort of way to target a weak pawn, and then that can win the game as well. The game continues, queen to c7, knight a2. White wants to play the natural move pawn to e4, continuing to build this territory advantage and freeing the bishop. But if we do it right now, knight to c5 is actually really annoying, and it's difficult for white to not play passively in order to avoid the destruction of the knight on c3, followed by the winning of the pawn on e4. This explains white's next move, knight to a2. I did have a student once ask me, why didn't black play bishop to a5? I will let you figure that out for yourself, and if you see the answer to this, please post it in the comments. Black plays bishop to e7, pawn to e4, expanding our space, our territory, building on that. Knight to c5, knight to c3, rook f to d8, rook f1. This move might seem strange to the player because it takes a rook from an open file and puts it on a closed file. But if we remember that it is our obligation to build and make use of our positive factors, this move makes all the sense in the world. White is simply looking to play f5, building on this territory advantage, but also trapping the bishop on g6. Jeremy plays queen d7, increasing control of the open file and preventing f5. g4, interesting move. If I showed this position to most intermediate players, they would probably laugh because they have been taught for a very long time, do not push pawns in front of your castled king. However, please remember, one of the most advanced ideas that I teach as you become an advanced player or try to grow into an advanced player is this. An advantage is only as good as it can be made use of. And likewise, a disadvantage, a weakness, is only as weak as it can be punished and exploited. Yes, pushing the pawns in front of your castle king does inherently weaken his position. However, it's only as weak as your opponent's ability to attack and punish that king. Other than giving a one-move check on d4, which could easily be blocked with a natural developing counter-attacking move, there is no way that black can immediately or in the near future attack this king. Part of being an advanced player is raising your risk versus reward awareness, okay? And so white is willing to risk the safety of his king as long as he sees it cannot be exploited, for the reward of guaranteeing that f5 will be played, pursuing the use and expansion of our favorable territory space imbalance. Black plays h6 to avoid the trapping of the bishop, f5, bishop to h7, bishop to e3, queen to c7, gain more territory, save the bishop, pawn takes g7, king takes g7. Now again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I do want everyone to see what the consequence would have been if bishop takes g7. This is more of a beginner to intermediate question, but take a time and see why in case you didn't. But here comes our key position. Pawn to g5. In this position, I'm going to turn my attention over to a student I have that will remain anonymous. He has been working with me for a long time in order to break down positions and to help understand what's really going on. If you ever take the time to read Jeremy Silman, you will understand that there are 7 to 9 or 10 major factors in any position, imbalances, that a chess player must be able to recognize and be able to identify the rules, strategies, obligations that a player has once they know that that imbalance is true, that it's existing or can be created. However, going even beyond that, when you become super advanced or you're trying to push for those advanced levels, in a real game of chess, when the time is ticking, we don't have time to go through every single detail on a chess position. We will burn way too much time and energy on a single move, and then oftentimes that will catch up to us later in the game, and when critical moments occur, you won't have the time and energy you need to finish the game properly, and that's when blunders and mistakes are made that cost you the game. So, in a position like this, it is a master's responsibility to cut through the mist and be able to see what are the most important, critical imbalances that exist in this position. Now again, how do we determine out of all the different factors, out of all the differences that exist, what's the most important? I'll go back to what I said before. It's only important if it can be made use of. Again, it's only important if it can be made use of. So, random student, out of all of the factors going on in this position for white or black, I would like you to try and determine what factors for white and black are the most critical right now based on being used, and what that should tell each player about their obligations to this position. Go ahead.
Okay. In terms of, I guess I'll just go through the imbalances. So for light squared bishops, white's light squared bishop doesn't really have a ton of activity. Black's dark squared bishop is kind of similar issues as white's light squared bishop. It doesn't really have very many moves or positions to go to. It is defending the knight on c5, but it's not being super active. White's dark squared bishop is putting pressure on the knight on c5, and it's also putting pressure over on the king side. And then black's light squared bishop is putting pressure on e4, but still doesn't really have very many options. In terms of knights, both sides have their knights. They're both pretty reasonably developed. However, black's knight could be kicked right now with b4, but it is currently putting pressure on e4 along with the light squared bishop for black. And then white's knight doesn't really have much future. Yes, it can be argued that it is putting pressure on the b5 and d5 squares, but those are clearly controlled by black. And then for rooks, there is one open file, the d file, which is being controlled by black's rook. And yeah, the rooks want to be on open files, so that could be contested, but there's no real way to really win the file. And then I guess king safety is also important to look at. For black, the king is kind of more open only because white has more pieces in that area that could move in there, such as the queen or rook. Has more pressure there on the king versus white. There isn't really a way for black to get in there at all. Just because the knight, just because the queen and rooks can't really move over to that side of the board super easily. I think I have gone over the most important imbalances for this position.
All right, so then the question is based on, as you have stated, the most critical imbalances, the most critical factors that are crucial to understanding this particular position. What are the clear goals for both sides?
White's goal is to try to break open the king side more and activate their rooks and queen and bishop to target black. Black first needs to evaluate if white has a strong enough attack that could lead to checkmate, and then they need to look at other ways to either ignore the threat, try to create a threat of their own, or understand a way that can defend but also doesn't become too passive.
And for black, I mean, so I hear you saying that white should be trying to attack black's king. I hear you saying that black should be trying to assess the danger level. I don't hear a plan for black other than assess the danger level. But assess the danger level doesn't give us a blueprint of how to proceed for black either. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes. So black needs to understand the level of the threat that they're facing, but at the same time, they need to come up with a plan of their own. So I guess potential plans could be.
And something to guide you is that I didn't hear you necessarily say what black's most favorable imbalance is in this position, because that should be guiding black's overall plan, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So what would you say that black's overall greatest strength in this position is?
The pressure that they have on like the center pawns in the center of the position, like the E file, and then they have control over the D file.
Okay. So with all that being said, you said that white should be trying to attack black's king. Black should be going after the weak center pawns and using the open file. What do you think that black should play right now, and why?
Right now, I think black should take advantage of the fact that the G file may be opening soon, so they can take control over another key file, because their rook already has control over the D file. So it'd be ideal to take more control over another file and take advantage of, the rooks while they have the opportunity to do so.
Okay. And can you find a move for me that meets that criteria?
Yes. I would say probably king to h8 meets that criteria.
Okay. I think that you have done a fantastic job, and I do think if you had even more time to calculate, I think you would come up with an even more accurate move. But you're basically spot on. And from here, I'm going to have Jeremy Silman be the voice that guides us. He says, this position is an easy read. Now, again, anytime that someone says something is easy, you gotta be skeptical about it. Easy is always subjective. It's easy if you have a deep understanding and familiarity with imbalances and the obligations that come with those. But if you do, then this position is an easy read. Black's king is vulnerable and therefore needs to be cared for, while white's pawn structure is a mess. Quite simply, white will have the advantage if he can find safe haven for his king. Notice how I didn't mention the threat of g takes h6 check. The reason is that one should have a firm grasp of the imbalances and the goals that their existence creates before thinking about threats and replies to them. Now that we know what both sides are trying to achieve, white wants to attack the enemy king, black wants to find a safe home for it and then punish white's weak central pawns, the correct move for black will make perfect sense. Bishop to g6, exclamation point. I played this instantly. Walter Brown had hoped for h takes g5, queen to h5 when white's pieces are getting uncomfortably close to the black king. Notice that bishop to g6 does three important things at the same time. Number one, it solidifies the pressure that this rook has been creating on f7. Remember, typically pressure is created when a weaker piece can attack something that makes us have to sit around defending it, especially if we have to use more powerful pieces to babysit it, basically. It's a very big inconvenience. Number two, as you mentioned, because of the tension between the black h and g pawns, it is basically a certainty that the g file is going to open. Bishop g6 is going to block that file. And finally, this also prevents intrusion of moves like queen to h5. This move does many, many, many things at the same time. One other thing that we have to mention is that in this case, you are giving up a pawn with check. So the mind automatically screams, don't let him take it. And it can blind you to all other possibilities. This is why creating an imbalanced oriented base of knowledge about every position you reach is so important. Knowing a position's priorities allows you to step beyond emotional reactions and make decisions where logic not emotions, rule. The game continued. G takes h6 check, king to h7. Notice how the king's new situation has found shelter on h7, and the pawn on h6 actually plays the role of traitor, since it suddenly is giving shelter to the opposing king. I felt very confident here, but with both of us now only having 3 minutes left to make 16 moves, the game actually ended up in a draw. It went bishop f4, bishop e7, rook f2, rook d4, rook g2, rook g8, bishop e3, queen takes e5. He considers this move dubious. I had been dying to sacrifice the exchange all through this game, and now I jumped at the chance. However, this was not technically the best moment to do so. However, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4 check, king h1, and they agreed to a draw. Jeremy finishes out this with a final thought. I had thought I stood better here, but a quick look convinced me that things are actually far from clear. Knight takes e4, bishop d3, knight trade, bishop check, rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes, rook f1, bishop f6, rook trade, king trade. And with no time left for either side, neither Walter nor myself wanted to touch this position. Again, there's a lot that we can learn from this. And I just want to give a huge commendation to the student, because I feel that so many of us, if we looked at this position and someone just played the move pawn g5 at us and we see the threat of g takes h6, we have been, listen to me people, we have been conditioned not to lose material. And it makes sense. When we were beginners, we accidentally lost our pieces left and right. We lost many chess games because of this. And as we practiced, as we got better, the number one hurdle we all had to get better at was to stop accidentally losing our pieces and start winning our opponent's pieces. And then improving even further so we could find 1, 2, or 3 move tactics, pins, skewers, combinations that could win us a piece, a pawn, or the game. And so again, material had been our number one priority. And so now the command is, it's not forget material, okay? But it is this. You have to stop putting such a high weight on material. You have to take it down from its pedestal of power, and you need to realize that material, how many pieces you have, how many points you have, is just as important as all the other factors on a chessboard. Your piece activity, your king safety, your center control, your pawn structure, your initiative, and the list goes on and on. So again, the fact that the student in this game was able to cut through the robotic way of thinking and say, hey, this is Black's priority. Get the king safe. And then also identify that Black's goal is to target the weak pawns on e4 and e5. Again, there's many imbalances going on in this position, but I said, what are the imbalances that can and are being used? Because they are the most critical. White is currently using force to go after this king. And so it is absolutely critical and being used. And Black is absolutely targeting the weak, doubled, isolated pawn structure for White in the center. So again, you have dynamic attacking potential for White and static pawn structure targeting for Black. And if you can cut through that mess and say, I need to save my king, secure him first, and go after the enemy pawns, you are going to be a big step ahead. And the student played king to h8. It's not the most accurate. However, he was willing to not just react to g takes h6. He was willing to prioritize the needs of the position. So anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, there is so much richness here. But remember, it's always important to have a key takeaway from any of these things. And the key takeaway is this. Start trying to figure out what the goals of your position are based on the most critical factors present. And if you don't know what I'm talking about yet, start with Jeremy Silman. Pick up his first book, The Introduction, The Amateur's Mind. The Amateur's Mind is an amazing read. It's very, very easy read, and it lightly starts covering all of the major factors in a position and the strategies that govern them. Once you read that book, it's time for How to Reassess Your Chess, the complete understanding of his planning system so that you can cut through the chaos on a chessboard and figure out the goals, the obligations of your position, and replace your emotional reactions to chess with logical, concrete understanding and decisions. I'm National Master Jesse Cohen. This is Summit School of Chess, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys, for now.